Welcome to Pansmith's Guide to Applied Energistics 2. This guide will cover what's important in AE2, starting from getting materials and making a basic storage system, to autocrafting and wireless terminals, and everything between. This guide is for Applied Energistics unofficial extended life for Minecraft version 1.12.2, and as a result, some features may be different or not present on other versions of the mod. Alongside that, this guide assumes you have a tech mod installed. Additionally, channels will be explained near the end of the guide. Without further ado, let's get into the prerequisites of making an ME network. Like with any mod, you will need to gather some resources before being able to craft anything. Applied Energistics adds two main resources, Certus Quartz and Fluix. Certus Quartz is found in-world as an ore and can be gathered like any other gem ore. Certus Quartz can also be charged. How it will be charged will be detailed later, but note this charged variant can also spawn as an ore and will have special effects to differentiate. Fluix is made by dropping charged Certus, redstone, and nether quartz into water. The three will react and turn into 2 Fluix. You will also need to gather the 4 inscriber presses, which will be used in recipes. These are found in the middle of meteors that generate throughout the world, both above and below ground. You can craft a meteorite compass to help you find these meteors, as the compass will point you towards any nearby sky stone. Note that these will point to the chunk that the sky stone is in, rather than the exact block. The chargers was used to charge Certus Quartz into charged Certus Quartz, and the inscribers was used to create processors with the aid of those presses. Power can only be inserted into the top and the bottom of the charger, but what you can do is rotate the charger with a wrench, allowing you to be able to easily automate it. The inscriber's I/O is sighted, but you can get crafty in much the same way and rotate the inscriber to allow for easy automation. Also, to power your ME network, you will need energy and an energy acceptor. Redstone flux, energy units, GregTech energy units, among others will all work. Now, you might be wondering what those glass cables are. Those are ME cables, and alongside transferring AE power, they allow ME components to be able to communicate with each other in what is known as a matter-energy network, or ME network for short. Adding storage to your ME network is done primarily with drives and storage cells. A given drive can hold up to 10 storage cells, with each storage cell being able to hold up to 63 individual item types, the same amount as a double chest. The exact math of bytes is a little complicated, but for now just note that higher tiers of cells can hold more items within those 63 types allocated to it. Viewing the items in an ME network is done with a terminal. A regular terminal can be used, but a crafting terminal can perform crafting recipes from within your terminal. Also note you can color your ME cables, and these will affect your terminals. You can also use facades to hide cables. And just like that, you have a basic ME network. You can store items with a drive, and insert and extract the items with your terminal. But what if you wanted to import and export items from your ME network automatically? That's where the interface comes in. The interface can export items from your ME network based on what's set in these top 9 slots. It will import anything inserted into it into the ME network. You may have noticed the slots here with the outlines. That's where we get into AE2's biggest feature. To get started with autocrafting, you will need patterns and a pattern terminal. Pattern terminals are used to encode recipes to your pattern. Pattern terminals can code 2 types of recipes, crafting and processing. The interface is what is used to perform these crafts. If placed adjacent to a molecular assembler, crafting pattern recipes can be performed. The interface will attempt to use as many adjacent molecular assemblers as possible, and the molecular assemblers can be further sped up with acceleration cards. If adjacent to any other block, the interface will perform processing pattern recipes. Processing patterns tell your ME network can export these items at this interface and receive these items in return. For example, the following pattern will have your ME network export an iron ingot from this interface and expect to have an iron plate be imported into the ME network. Note that the item doesn't need to be imported into the same interface that the pattern is in, which is useful if working with multi-blocks. Also note that for crafting recipes and most processing recipes, you can use GI to easily encode recipes. Simply pull up the recipe in GUI with the pattern terminal GUI and a question mark button will appear. Press this and the pattern will autofill with the appropriate items. When attempting to perform an autocraft, AE2 will tell you how many bytes it will require. The amount of bytes needed will depend on the size and complexity of the craft. These requirements are satisfied with crafting storages. You can place multiple crafting storages next to each other and they will merge together, forming what is known as a CPU. Each CPU will perform one autocrafting task, so having more CPUs will allow you to run more autocrafting tasks at the same time. You can use pattern expansion cards to increase the amount of pattern slots that a given interface has, up to 36. You can also wrench an interface to make sure it will only communicate with a specific adjacent block, or use the micropart version instead. Also, full-size interfaces will carry any power and data through them. This is also true for other ME components like drives. It's especially useful with interfaces, as you can easily set up rows of interfaces for autocrafting with. What's been covered up to this point is all the things you'll need to have a basic ME network with autocrafting running, but the following components will help massively improve your network. The storage bus allows a ME network to be able to interface with an attached inventory. A good example of using a storage bus would be in combination with storage drawers. A storage drawer controller can push and pull from all nearby drawers. Attaching a storage bus to it would allow your ME network to be able to push and pull from all those drawers, allowing for cheap and easy bulk storage. The Origix storage bus works largely the same way, but also allows you to filter by Origix. Configuration options are very in-depth, allowing for complex filtering to suit your needs. The level emitter emits a redstone signal when the ME network has or does not have a certain amount of a given item, based on what's set in its configuration. While it may not seem that useful on its own, consider that machines and pipes from other mods can be redstone controlled. For example, you could have an interface exporting iron ingots to a compactor which turns them into iron plates. You could then have a level emitter pointed towards said compactor that emits a redstone signal when you have 100 plates in your system. What this means is that the compactor will create 100 iron plates, then turn off, and will only turn back on to bring the amount of iron plates in your system back up to 100. This idea of passively creating items is known as passiving and will be discussed in further detail later. Point-to-point, or P2P for short, is a method of moving items through an ME network instantaneously without requiring storage. PDP can move items, fluids, redstone signal, and light, as well as redstone flux and GregTech EU if the applicable mods are installed. To use a P2P tunnel, you first right-click it with the appropriate item to set it to what you want it to move, then shift right-click the input tunnel with a memory card. From there, right-click all output tunnels with the same memory card. P2P tunnels are one input to an infinite amount of outputs. Note that using P2P to transport energy will incur a 5% tax on RF or GTEUs sent through your system. If you've ever noticed your ME system flicker, it's because it's using more energy than what you're providing it. This can be mitigated with an energy cell, which acts as a battery for ME power. It comes in a regular and a compressed version. The interface terminal allows you to see all the interfaces in your network and be able to remotely insert and extract patterns from them. You can also search by input and output of patterns or the name of the interface. Additionally, you can click the Highlight Interface button. It will highlight that interface and world, as well as printing its coordinates in chat. The security terminal can be used to specify what players are allowed to interact with your ME network and what permissions they have, which can be useful in multiplayer. A player can create a biometric card by shift right-clicking while holding a blank biometric card, and someone with permission to be able to edit the security terminal can then grant them specific permissions by toggling these buttons and then placing the biometric card into the security terminal. A blank biometric card in the system will define the permissions for any user that does not have a biometric card in the system. Fluids are stored like items. You can use fluid cells to store fluids or use fluid storage buses. Fluid cells are able to hold up to 5 fluid types at once, and the byte system works the same as with items. Fluid storage buses work similarly to their item variants, being able to interface with the attached tank. You can use the fluid interface to import and export fluids from your ME network, working largely the same way as its item variant. Likewise, the fluid level emitter works like its item counterpart, changing states based on the millibuckets of a given fluid. The fluid interface can be used to view the fluids in your network, and the fluid interface configuration terminal works like its item variant. Basic wireless AE is pretty simple to set up. Firstly, you need to add a security terminal to your network. Alongside its previously mentioned abilities, it will be used to bind your wireless terminals to your ME network. This is done by placing the terminal in the top right slot. You will then need to add at least one wireless access point to your network. The range and energy cost of this wireless access point is determined by the amount of wireless boosters you apply to it. Note that you can have multiple wireless access points in your base, so you can better optimize coverage if you wish. AE2 comes with a variety of wireless terminals, with crafting, pattern, and fluid wireless terminals all being available. You can also place them in the bobble slot and access them with a keybind. A quantum bridge can be used to upgrade your basic wireless AE into something much greater, as well as having a use on its own. Quantum bridge is a multi-block consisting of a ring of ME quantum ring blocks surrounding an ME quantum link chamber. Cables can connect to the ring blocks adjacent to the quantum link chamber, but not the corners. Alongside that, you'll need a singularity. Singularities are created in the matter condenser by inputting 256,000 items or buckets of fluid. If you plan on using the quantum bridge to improve your wireless terminal's capabilities, that's all there is to it. Just turn the newfound singularities into an unlimited wireless card and insert that card into the quantum bridge. This will allow your wireless terminal to be able to access your network from anywhere, regardless of distance or dimension. The quantum bridge has other uses for allowing your network to connect between two different places, regardless of location or dimension. You first want to have a quantum bridge at each location, then take a singularity and explode it alongside some ender dust. This explosion will turn your input items to a pair of quantum entangled singularities. Take these quantum entangled singularities and insert one at each bridge to bind them together. Note that both sides will need power to initially make the connection. AE2 provides some options for naming and filtering to help keep your ME network organized. Firstly, you can rename parts in an anvil and their new names will be reflected in your ME network. This works for interfaces, P2P, CPUs, among other things. A quartz cutting knife can also be used to rename things without requiring XP. Right-click a part while holding a quartz cutting knife to open up a GUI. From there, you can type whatever you want and the part will be renamed as such. Cells can be partitioned to only allow specific items to be stored within them. Simply place the cell inside of a cell workbench, then place whatever items you want this cell to be able to store within the bottom slot. You can also use an inverter card to turn the whitelist into a blacklist, or a fuzzy card to work with NBT. You can also use copy mode to have the cell workbench retain the item set, so you can easily reuse the configuration. View cells can be used to limit what can be seen on a given terminal. The view cell is configured in the same way as you would partition a cell, and then placed in these slots in the terminal GUI. For example, you could have a view cell that contains a piece of wool and also has an inverter card and a fuzzy card. Placing the view cell in the terminal slot would have it hide all wool variants. Passive production is the automatic creation of items rather than using autocrafting to create them. The reason for doing this is because some items are either needed often enough or simply take a long enough time to craft where crafting them on demand would be unviable. Passiving is a concept that exists outside of AE2, but AE2 can greatly improve your setups. As mentioned before, the level emitter is a powerful tool for passiving, as it can be used to control machines and setups with redstone. You could also use a storage bus in a drawer, as eventually the drawer would fill up and the machine would not be able to push any more items. Passiving as a concept only becomes super important in expert packs, where passively producing items is key, but any pack can benefit from the idea. Storage drawers in particular are useful in mob farms, as connecting the output directly to your network would eventually cause your storage to be filled with mob drops, but using a storage controller and a storage bus would help solve the issue, as the items from the mob farm would be in the storage drawers, which would then interface with the ME network. You could also place void upgrades on the drawers to make sure they don't back up. This chapter is more or less a mishmash of important information that didn't flow well with the rest of the script, so here goes. You can double your Certus and Flux by grinding it down, combining it with sand to create seeds. A decent number of tech mods give better ways to grow these seeds, but if playing with AE2 without these options, you drop them in a water pool surrounded by crystal growth accelerators, and then wait. Automating this can be done easily with any dropper and a ranged hopper that can be filtered. Flukes can be automated in a similar way, just without the growth accelerators. Again, most mod packs do give you better options to grow these seeds, such as Mechanism or Lazy A2, so check your options. I mentioned earlier that import and export buses are outclassed by interfaces, but they still have their situational uses when you factor in that they can use cards. They can use fuzzy cards, working like how they do with view cells, as well as being able to be redstone controlled with a redstone card. AE2 doesn't play super well with MBT, and this manifests in two different ways. Firstly, items that do not share the same MBT will not stack. While that's not a big issue on its own, also consider that non-stackables will each take up a type on a drive. So, if a friend were to hook up a wither skeleton farm to the ME network without thinking, your drives would be clogged with stone swords pretty quickly. If your friend had already flooded the network with stone swords, what you can do is create an export bus set to stone swords that also has a fuzzy filter on it, so that it will ignore MBT. The other way MBT can cause issues is with autocrafting. An example of this would be attempting to use extra utilities red coal in patterns. If you use GAI's autofill feature, it would use a version of the red coal that differs from what you would be using. The solution to this issue would be to create the patterns using your version of the red coal. On the topic of autocrafting, your network will automatically parallelize when autocrafting. For example, if you have two interfaces that both have a processing pattern turn an iron ingot into an iron plate, your ME network will use both of them at the same time to reduce crafting time. Also, you can middle click an item in a terminal to bring up the autocrafting GUI for it if it has a pattern. Additionally, you can hold shift when confirming how many items you want to craft to skip the crafting plan preview and start the recipe. The network tool can be used to see what is on your ME network and how much power it is consuming. It also has an inventory that can hold cards and toggle the visibility of facades. Here's something to consider when making autocrafting setups. You can have an interface push into a buffer inventory, and from there, route the items into various machines. For example, you could have a pattern that creates 4 enderium dust from 3 lead dust, 1 platinum dust, and 4 ender pearls. The interface would place all the items in the buffer chest, and from there you would route the dusts into the fabricator and the pearls into the magma crucible, which would then be melted and pushed into the fabricator. The magnet card, placed in your wireless terminal, can be used to automatically insert items into your ME network when you pick them up. The crafting card is strongly warned against, as it can spam your ME network with autocrafting requests, thus generating lag if overused. Because of that, they're not a substitution for passiving. But if something is more involved but not massively complex or needed constantly, you can get away with using it in limited amounts. The setup that I've found is having an interface with a crafting card attached to a storage bus. The items you want to be auto-crafted are placed in the supply slots, and the storage bus will read the contents of the interface. This guide has ignored channel mechanics for the sake of easily explaining things, but at the end of the day, channels are fairly simple to explain. Each component attached to an ME network will require one channel to operate, and having too many components on a given cable will cause everything in that network to stop working. A regular cable can carry up to 8 channels, and a dense cable can carry up to 32 channels. Dense cables cannot connect to microparts with the exception of P2P buses. Colored cables will not attach to cables of other colors, but can connect to flux cables, allowing connections if needed. Cable anchors can be used to achieve the same effect for cables of the same color. Quartz fiber cables can be used to transport only ME power across it. These are used to create what are known as subnetworks, which can be situationally useful for organization. Any network without a controller will have a maximum of 8 channels, but an ME controller will output 32 channels per side and can be arranged into a multi-block formation with these rules. P2P can also transport channels. You can place a P2P bus directly on the side of controller, and you can move said channels wherever you wish via P2P. You could create a basic setup like this, which will grant you 2,304 channels.